Welcome to Serial Killers with Ben Carter. I'm your host, Ben Carter. In the quiet English town of Neasden, in the shadow of the Wembley Stadium, a young boy named Graham Young was developing an unusual, sinister fascination. Born in the year of 1947, Graham was, by all accounts, an ordinary child. His fascination, however, was anything but. His interest lay not in the usual hobbies of boys his age, but in something far darker. Graham Young was obsessed with poisons. From an early age, the young boy spent countless hours studying books about toxicology. He devoured any information he could find about the deadly effects of certain substances on the human body. But it wasn't just the academic side that interested him. What truly captivated Graham was the idea of wielding such lethal power, the ability to end a life with just a small dose of a seemingly innocent substance. By the age of 14, Graham had become so knowledgeable about poisons that he could discuss them with the proficiency of a trained professional. But this was not a harmless teenage obsession. This was an obsession that would soon turn deadly. It was Graham's fascination with poisons that led to his first attempt at murder. In 1961, at the age of just 14, Graham poisoned his stepmother Molly with a dose of antimony. The poison caused her to suffer from severe vomiting and diarrhea, which was initially mistaken for gastroenteritis. But when Molly's condition worsened, doctors finally identified antimony poisoning as the cause. Graham's stepmother survived this first attempt on her life, but the young boy was not deterred. He continued to experiment with poisons, honing his knowledge and refining his methods. It wasn't long before he tried again, this time successfully. In 1962, Molly Young died from antimony poisoning. The poison was administered by her stepson, Graham. He had accomplished what he set out to do. He had killed with poison. But this was not the end. This was just the beginning. Graham Young, the quiet, unassuming boy from Neasden, had a deadly obsession, and he was just getting started. His story serves as a chilling reminder of how a seemingly ordinary person can harbor an extraordinary and deadly secret. As we delve deeper into the life and crimes of Graham Young, we uncover a dark tale of obsession, manipulation, and cold-blooded murder. A tale that questions the very nature of evil and forces us to confront the terrifying reality that sometimes the most dangerous monsters are those that hide in plain sight. Neasden, in the 1960s, was a nondescript, predominantly working-class suburb in northwest London. A place where the daily rhythm of life was dictated by the clockwork precision of factories and the unrelenting hum of machinery. This was the stage upon which the life of Graham Young played out, a setting which, in many ways, mirrored his own personality, seemingly ordinary, unremarkable, yet concealing a chilling undercurrent of darkness beneath its surface. The social climate of the time was one of post-war recovery and rebuilding. The austerity of the 1950s had given way to a period of economic growth and increased prosperity. There was a sense of optimism in the air, a belief in the potential for a better future. But beneath this veneer of progress, there were cracks. The specter of the Second World War still loomed large, and the societal wounds it had inflicted were far from healed. Old values were being questioned, and the status quo was under scrutiny. In this era of change and uncertainty, the quiet, unassuming young family found themselves at the center of a horrific series of events that would shock the nation. They lived in an unassuming semi-detached house, a typical English home, with a tidy front garden and netted windows. The Youngs were seen as a respectable, hard-working family. Fred Young was a motor mechanic, a man known for his dedication and work ethic. His wife, Molly, was a homemaker, tending to the needs of the family with quiet efficiency. But behind the netted windows and the neatly trimmed hedges, a sinister plot was unfolding. Young Graham, the introverted teenager with an unusual fascination for poisons, was preparing to put his deadly knowledge to use. As his family went about their daily lives, oblivious to the danger lurking within their own home, Graham was perfecting his lethal craft, experimenting with dosage and monitoring the effects with a detached, clinical interest. This outwardly normal suburban setting was the backdrop against which Graham Young's horrifying crimes were committed. The seemingly mundane routines of daily life served as a stark contrast to the dark and deadly obsession that consumed him. The ordinary was juxtaposed with the extraordinary, the benign with the malevolent. and it was this stark contrast that made the ensuing events all the more shocking and disturbing. For it served as a grim reminder that sometimes the face of evil is not a snarling monster, but a quiet, unassuming boy from Neasden. Graham's victims were not chosen at random. The first to suffer was his own family, the people who trusted him implicitly and had no reason to suspect his deadly intentions. His stepmother, Molly, was the first victim. At the age of 12, Graham began adding small doses of poison to her tea. Molly began experiencing severe bouts of vomiting, stomach pains, and debilitating headaches. But despite her worsening condition, no one suspected foul play. The symptoms were attributed to a stomach bug, or perhaps stress. Fred, Graham's father, was next. He too fell ill, experiencing the same symptoms as Molly. Doctors were puzzled, unable to find a clear cause for their illnesses. Meanwhile, Graham watched on, noting their reactions and adjusting his doses accordingly. While his family suffered, Graham continued his studies with an almost obsessive fervor. He was fascinated by the power he held, the ability to control life and death through the careful application of poison. Then, in 1961, tragedy struck. Molly Young died suddenly, her body unable to withstand the constant onslaught of poison. Her death was unexpected, a shock that sent waves through the tight-knit community. An autopsy was performed, but the cause of death was attributed to a rare form of progressive nerve degeneration. But Graham wasn't satisfied with the death of his stepmother. He craved more power, more control. He turned his attention to his sister, Winifred, and his father. Both began suffering from bouts of illness, inexplicable stomach pains and vomiting. His father's health deteriorated rapidly, but miraculously he survived. Winifred, on the other hand, wasn't so lucky. She fell into a coma and was hospitalized. Despite the mounting evidence of something amiss, the truth remained hidden. The doctors were stumped, the community was in shock, and Graham Young, the quiet, unassuming boy from Neasden, continued his deadly game. Little did they know that this was just the beginning, that Graham was yet to cast his net wider, to claim more victims. The full extent of his crimes was yet to be exposed. His reign of terror was far from over. As Graham's fascination with poison escalated, so did the complexity of his crimes. After the death of his stepmother and the hospitalization of his sister, Graham began poisoning his schoolmates and even his teachers. Reports of sudden illness began to ripple through his school, with students and staff suffering from symptoms eerily similar to those experienced by the Young family. But still, the link to Graham remained undiscovered. In the meantime, a local pathologist named Dr. Hugh Moyer Johnston began to suspect something was amiss. He couldn't shake off the feeling that the spate of illnesses in the community was more than mere coincidence. With this suspicion, he launched a quiet investigation, reviewing the medical records of those affected. Johnston's investigation led him to the troubling case of the Young family. The symptoms, the timeline, and the severity of the illnesses struck him as out of the ordinary. His suspicion deepened when he learned about Molly Young's death and its subsequent attribution to a rare nerve disease. Ultimately, it was an observant school headmaster who connected the dots. He noticed that the illnesses at school seemed to center around one particular student, Graham Young. The headmaster contacted the police, who in turn reached out to Johnston. As law enforcement began to look into Graham's background, they discovered his obsession with poisons and chemicals. This discovery, coupled with Dr. Johnston's suspicion, was enough to launch a full-scale investigation into Graham Young. Law enforcement officers descended upon the Young household, searching for any evidence that could link Graham to the mysterious illnesses. What they found was chilling. Hidden in Graham's room was a makeshift laboratory, complete with various chemicals, homemade concoctions, and books on toxicology. The evidence was damning, pointing to a sinister plot of poisoning that had been ongoing for years. The realization was horrifying. The quiet, studious boy from Neasden, once seen as harmless, was now suspected to be behind a series of poisonings that had caused suffering and death in his family and school community. As the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place, it was clear that Graham Young was not the innocent child he had portrayed himself to be. The full extent of his crimes was now coming to light, marking the end of his reign of terror, for now at least. In the face of such disturbing evidence, law enforcement had to grapple with the chilling reality that they were dealing with a criminal of an unusual sort. The usual suspects for such crimes, disgruntled ex-partners, resentful employees, or seasoned criminals, did not apply here. Instead, they were investigating a teenager, barely old enough to leave school, yet apparently capable of such calculated harm. Graham Young's fascination with poison was not a fleeting teenage curiosity. It was a deep-seated obsession that he nurtured, cultivated, and used to conduct a series of poisoning attacks that had instilled fear in his community. His actions were not impulsive, but instead meticulously planned and executed. His victims were not chosen at random either. They were individuals within his immediate surroundings, people who trusted him, making his crimes all the more chilling. As the authorities began to build a psychological profile of Graham, they were confronted with a terrifying paradox. The boy who stood before them was studious, intelligent, and seemingly normal. But hidden beneath this veneer of normality was a dark undercurrent. A fascination with death and suffering, an eerie calm in the face of the pain he inflicted, and a complete lack of remorse for his actions. It was the profile of a person who was not just capable of causing harm, but seemed to revel in it. In the course of their investigation, authorities would discover that Graham's poisoning spree was not driven by a desire for revenge or the thrill of the crime. Rather, it was his obsession with toxicology and his desire to experiment with these deadly substances on human subjects that motivated his actions. He was a self-styled scientist, conducting macabre experiments in his makeshift laboratory, testing the effects of his poisons on unsuspecting victims. The investigators also found that Graham was a master manipulator. He maintained his facade of innocence, often showing concern for his victims, even as he watched them suffer the effects of his poison. It was this ability to maintain his composure and keep his sinister secret that allowed his reign of terror to continue for as long as it did. The emerging portrait of Graham Young was that of a young man whose intellect and fascination with toxicology had skewed into a dangerous obsession. A person who used his knowledge not for the betterment of society, but to inflict pain and suffering. A teenager turned killer, whose crimes had gripped a community in fear, and whose arrest marked a chilling chapter in the annals of criminal history. The investigation was far from over, but the suspect was now in custody. The next step was to understand the full extent of his crimes and bring him to justice. The process of unearthing the depth and scale of Graham Young's crimes was painstaking. Investigators pored over his diaries, meticulously cataloging each entry, each vile experiment documented with clinical detachment. The diaries were a chilling testament to Graham's fascination with poison, detailing not only the substances used, but also the reactions of his victims. They were instrumental in providing the forensic evidence needed to build a solid case against him. Toxicologists played a crucial role in this investigation. They undertook an exhaustive analysis of the substances Graham had in his possession. Among them were a wide range of deadly poisons, including thallium, which was identified as the substance responsible for the majority of the illnesses and deaths. Thallium, often referred to as the poisoner's poison, is colorless, odorless, and tasteless, making it the perfect weapon for a secretive poisoner like Graham. The symptoms of thallium poisoning mirrored those that his victims showed: nausea, stomach pain, nerve damage, and hair loss. The link became undeniable. But it was the discovery of significant levels of thallium in the exhumed bodies of Graham's stepmother, Molly, and his early victim, his school friend Chris, that delivered the most damning evidence. Parallel to these scientific breakthroughs, other investigators were hard at work gathering witness testimonies. Graham's co-workers at the John Hadland Laboratories provided critical insights. They spoke of his odd fascination with toxicology, his frequent offers of tea and sandwiches, and the mysterious illnesses that seemed to plague the workplace. Their testimonies painted a picture of an individual who was at once a trusted colleague and an insidious predator, a chilling blend that was key to Graham's modus operandi. The revelations were shocking, but the evidence was irrefutable. The diary entries, the toxins in his possession, the high levels of thallium found in his victims, and the corroborating witness testimonies all pointed to one chilling fact. Graham Young had been methodically experimenting with poisons on his fellow human beings. Each piece of evidence was a crucial puzzle piece that, when put together, formed a clear image of a young man whose intellectual curiosity had morphed into a dangerous obsession. A clear image of a calculated killer. The full weight of the evidence was brought against Graham Young in June 1972, when he was arrested and charged with multiple counts of murder, attempted murder, and poisoning. His victims were his own family, friends, and colleagues. The news of his arrest sent shockwaves through the nation. A young man, barely out of his teens, was accused of such heinous acts. It was a chilling tale that seemed more suited to the pages of a horror novel than the streets of suburban England. The atmosphere in the courtroom was tense as the trial began. The public gallery was filled to capacity. Journalists from all over the country had descended upon the court, eager to document what was quickly becoming one of Britain's most infamous cases. The air was thick with a mix of morbid fascination and genuine fear, as people tried to comprehend the actions of a man who seemed so ordinary on the surface. As the proceedings went on, the meticulous nature of Graham's crimes was laid bare. The prosecution presented a detailed timeline, highlighting his calculated methods of administering poison and the cold-hearted precision with which he documented the effects on his victims. The diary, held up for all to see, was a chilling testament to his detached curiosity in the face of human suffering. Witnesses took the stand one after another, their accounts painting a disturbing portrait of Graham. His co-workers testified about his odd behavior, his disturbing fascination with poisons, and the mysterious illnesses that plagued the workplace. Each testimony added another layer to the case, reinforcing the image of Graham as a remorseless predator. When Graham himself took the stand, the courtroom fell silent. His calm, matter-of-fact delivery as he recounted his actions was unnerving. He showed no remorse, no sign of understanding the gravity of his actions. His chilling indifference only served to confirm the prosecution's portrayal of him as a cold, calculating killer. The public reaction was one of shock and horror. The newspapers were filled with stories about the Teacup Poisoner, as Graham was now known. The image of a young man, intelligent and seemingly normal, who had used his knowledge of chemistry to commit such horrific acts, was a chilling reminder of the darkness that can lurk beneath the surface of ordinary individuals. The trial ended with Graham Young being found guilty on all charges. He was sentenced to life in prison, with the judge noting the extraordinary cold-bloodedness of his crimes. The courtroom erupted in a mix of relief and horror as the sentence was delivered, marking the end of a chilling chapter in British crime history. Delving into the psyche of Graham Young, one is met with a chilling portrait of a man seemingly devoid of empathy or remorse. His childhood was marked by an early fascination with chemistry, particularly poisons. This obsession seemed to be linked not only to a genuine interest in the scientific properties of these substances, but also to a darker, more sinister desire to exert control over others. Most psychologists agree that Young's motivations for his crimes were rooted in a deep-seated need for dominance and control. He was a man who derived pleasure not from the act of killing itself, but from the process. From his meticulous record-keeping to the careful administration of his chosen poisons, Young's actions were those of an individual who derived satisfaction from the manipulation of others. While there is no concrete evidence of significant abuse or trauma in Young's early life, it is known that he was largely isolated from his peers. His mother died when he was young, and his father was often absent due to work. These experiences may have contributed to his developing a fascination with death and poison, as well as his lack of empathy for others. His psyche was further revealed in his prison interviews and writings. Young displayed classic signs of narcissism and grandiosity, viewing himself as an intellectual superior. His apparent lack of remorse and empathy is indicative of psychopathy, a personality disorder that is characterized by persistent antisocial behavior and a disregard for others' rights or feelings. In prison, Young continued to display his morbid fascination with poison and death. He would often boast about his crimes, showing no regret or understanding of the pain he had caused. His ability to manipulate and deceive those around him was evident even behind bars, as he convinced prison staff that he had reformed, leading to his premature release. Despite this, Young demonstrated no intention of changing his ways. Instead, he seemed to relish the fear and notoriety his crimes had brought him. He saw himself as a master manipulator, a puppet master pulling the strings of those around him. This chilling lack of remorse, combined with his fascination with poison, made Graham Young one of the most dangerous and disturbing figures in British criminal history. His crimes serve as a stark reminder of the darkness that can reside within the human mind, masked by a veneer of normality. In the wake of the Graham Young case, the community was left to reckon with the chilling reality of the crimes that had taken place in their midst. The small, ordinary town of Bovingdon was thrust into the limelight, its tranquility shattered by the horrifying acts of one of its own. The impact on the community was profound, with many residents feeling a sense of betrayal and fear that lingered long after the case was closed. Survivors of Young's poisonings, including his sister and father, had to grapple with the knowledge that they had been targeted by someone they knew and trusted. The psychological trauma endured by these survivors was immense, as they struggled to reconcile their memories of Graham as a family member or coworker with the reality of his actions. Their stories serve as a poignant reminder of the far-reaching effects of Young's crimes, not only physically, but also emotionally and psychologically. The media, both in the UK and internationally, seized upon the story, fascinated by the macabre nature of the crimes. Young was dubbed the Teacup Poisoner, a moniker that underscored the seemingly mundane, everyday circumstances in which he had carried out his poisonings. The case sparked a media frenzy, with countless articles, books, and documentaries produced in its wake. Graham Young's legacy is a dark one. His crimes have been etched into the annals of British criminal history, a chilling testament to the depths of human depravity. His story has served as a cautionary tale, a stark reminder of the potential danger lurking behind even the most ordinary of facades. Despite his desire for notoriety, Young's name did not become an emblem of intellectual superiority or masterful manipulation, as he may have hoped. Instead, it is synonymous with a chilling lack of empathy and a horrific abuse of trust. Young's life and crimes stand as a chilling reminder of the potential dangers of unchecked narcissism, manipulation, and a morbid fascination with death. In the end, the legacy of Graham Young is not one of admiration or fascination, but rather a harrowing reminder of the darkness that can reside within the human mind. His story has served as a stark warning of the potential consequences when such darkness is allowed to flourish unchecked. Despite the closing of the case, there remain a few unanswered questions and lingering thoughts that add a chilling layer of mystery to the already macabre story of Graham Young. The poisoner's precise motivations, for instance, remain somewhat enigmatic. While he was clearly fascinated by toxicology and demonstrated a pathological need for recognition, these factors alone may not fully explain the extent of his crimes. He was a master manipulator and deceiver, but what drove him to such extreme, lethal measures? The depths of Young's psyche remain a daunting abyss, perhaps forever beyond our full comprehension. The case also raises questions about the systems that failed to prevent Young's lethal spree. His release from Broadmoor, despite his apparent lack of remorse and continuing fascination with toxins, represents a critical lapse in judgment. Could more rigorous psychological assessments or stringent post-release monitoring have prevented the subsequent poisonings? The haunting implications of these questions underscore the importance of vigilance and thoroughness within our mental health and criminal justice systems. Furthermore, the impact of Young's actions on those who survived his poisonings and the wider community cannot be overstated. The lingering fear, betrayal, and trauma experienced by his victims and their families serve as a stark reminder of the human cost of his crimes. And yet, one cannot help but wonder if the lessons of Graham Young's story have been fully absorbed by society. As the media frenzy faded and time moved on, has the memory of his horrific acts served to bring about meaningful changes in how we deal with similar cases? Or are we still at risk of another teacup poisoner slipping through the cracks? Finally, Young's story prompts us to reflect on the nature of evil itself. He was not a mythical monster, but a man, a fact that makes his deeds all the more unsettling. His story forces us to confront the uncomfortable truth about the capacity for darkness within the human mind. It is a chilling reminder that evil does not always lurk in the shadows or hide behind a mask, but can instead be found in the most ordinary of circumstances, behind the most ordinary of faces. In the end, the story of Graham Young is not just a tale of crime and punishment, but a somber meditation on human nature and society's ability, or inability, to prevent such horrors. It is a narrative that, even decades after his death, continues to haunt and unsettle, leaving an indelible mark on the annals of criminal history. Thanks for listening. This has been Serial Killers with Ben Carter. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to follow us wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you'd like to support the show, subscribe to the Forbidden Knowledge Network on Patreon. Subscribe now.